Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday, as well as upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. Now, you guys, this is the last episode of July, which means it is the last episode in the category of sadistic and sinister stalkers. If you've been keeping up for the last couple months, you would know that from the beginning of the year, we have dedicated every single month to a different true crime category. We've covered unsolved cases, we've covered serial killers, we've covered celebrity cases, and this month of July was sadistic and sinister stalkers. Now, with it being the end of the month, this is going to be the last episode of this category. Now, as you guys can tell by the title of today's episode, we are talking about a case that definitely falls into the sadistic and sinister stalkers. Today, we are talking about the brutal murder of Amie Harwick. This case truly is a tragedy. It's devastating. It's also deeply unsettling and all in all just heartbreaking because Amie should be here today. But with that being said, we're going to jump right on into it. Amie Harwick was born on May 20th, 1981 in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. Her parents, Tony and Penny Harwick, actually adopted Amie when she was 11 months old. She grew up being one of two children. She had a younger brother named Chris, and the family was raised in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and Amie graduated from North Penn High School in 1999. Now, growing up, Amie was a free spirit. She had a bunch of different hobbies. One of her biggest passions was music. She absolutely loved music. Her favorite genre was heavy metal and rock. She loved going to different concerts of her favorite artists, and she even got her parents into the genre as well. So they all loved going to the concerts together. Along with that, Amie was a photographer and she did some modeling here and there as well. Now, in 2001, when Amie was 20 years old, she ended up moving out to Los Angeles, California, after doing long distance with her boyfriend at the time, who was a drummer in a band out in LA. So Amie decided that after some time, she wanted to be out there too and continue on in their relationship. Now, not too long after Amie finally moved out to LA, her and her boyfriend did end up getting married, and the marriage lasted for 3 years before ultimately the two decided to get a divorce. Now, after the divorce, Amie continued living her life in LA. She grew to have a great group of friends and was living with a roommate at the time. Now, something to know about Amie is that she was incredibly smart. After her divorce, she decided to enroll in Cal Poly University for her undergrad, and then she went on to receive her master's from Pepperdine University. Now, while she was at Pepperdine, she studied clinical psychology, and then she went on to get her doctorates of human sexuality from the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. Now, through this, she became a licensed family and marriage therapist. She began working with clients in person as well as posting videos on social media, giving people advice and guidance about the benefits of therapy. Now, Amie was really passionate about helping people and was excited about where this new career path was going to take her. Now, along with Amie's impressive academic resume, she also wrote a book. She ended up writing a book that was called The New Sex Bible for Women, and Amie really wanted to focus on working with and helping people that she felt were underrepresented and vulnerable. Now, Amie's family was her biggest cheerleader. They were there supporting her and cheering her along every step of the way of her academic and professional journey. They were incredibly supportive of her, and they had a very tight-knit relationship. Amie's favorite day of the year was visiting her family when they had their annual cookie baking day. Everyone would get together and they would bake and they would cook and they would eat and they would enjoy each other's company. It was just a very special time, and it was one that she really enjoyed because, again, she got to see her favorite people, her family. So I want to bring us to February 14th of the year 2020, and this was Valentine's Day. And at the specific point in time, Amie was single, so her and her friends decided that they were going to celebrate by going out for dinner and drinks on this specific night. Amie had a fun night with her friends, they enjoyed each other's company, and then she went home. Then, in the early morning hours of February 15th, police received a 911 call from Amie's roommate, Michael Herman. Michael was very frantic on the 911 call, begging the operator to send police to the home immediately. He claimed that while he was sleeping on the first story of the home, he woke up to a blood-curdling scream coming from Amie's bedroom. Now, initially, Michael said that he was a little bit out of it because he was in and out of sleep, not really knowing if he was hearing what he thought he was hearing. However, once he came to realize that something was very wrong, he immediately called for help. Now, when police arrived on the scene, they found Michael waiting outside of him and Amie's home. Now, when police arrived, it was clear that Michael, again, was very panicked and his adrenaline was running high. He was trying to articulate to officers that he thought that someone could have been inside of his home, like an intruder. However, things quickly went from bad to worse when Michael and police walked into the backyard of the home, and that is when they discovered Amie lying on the ground outside. Now, when police arrived and were able to assess Amie, she was still alive. However, she was rapidly declining. Her pulse was extremely weak and her breathing was unsteady, and police and paramedics tried waking her up and tried to get her to either verbally respond or open her eyes. However, she gave no response at all. An ambulance immediately arrived and rushed Amie to the hospital. However, sadly, she succumbed to her injuries and passed away. Now, at this point, police were trying to put together the pieces of what exactly happened here. They spoke again to Michael, who claimed that he could have sworn that he heard an intruder in the house and that there was a struggle between Amie and this intruder. And he also described what he heard to be choking noises. This was a 3-story home, and Amie's room was on the 3rd story, and Michael's room was directly below it. And he claimed that he could hear some struggling, some rustling, and again, what he called choking noises. Now, police did a canvass of the home, and at first, there was no sign of a struggle or an intruder. However, what they did notice is that Amie's purse and all of her belongings, including her wallet and cash, it was all laid out in her bedroom. Now, Amie did have a balcony right off of her bedroom, and it is believed that she was dropped from her balcony onto the ground. And when searching this balcony, police did discover a syringe with a yellowish brownish substance on the balcony. And these findings did make police wonder if what happened to Amie could have been a suicide. They began to wonder if Amie intentionally went over that balcony or if she had a potential accidental overdose. However, Amie's roommate Michael assured police that Amie did not use drugs. In fact, she was sober from both drugs and alcohol. And besides that, Amie never showed any signs of any suicidal ideations or wanting to end her life. Amie was in a really good place in her life and mentally. She had great friends. She loved her family. She was doing amazing in her career. She was absolutely thriving and excelling. She never showed any signs of wanting to end her life. Now, I do want to take a moment and talk about the roommate, Michael, because I do think that this is very pivotal and important to this case. Because right away, when police arrived on the scene, they were very suspicious of Michael because at the time, Michael was Amie's roommate. Michael was the only other known person in the house with Amie at this time. Along with that, Michael didn't have a set of house keys on him, which made police suspicious. They didn't know if they were actually talking to the intruder or if they were talking to Amie's roommate. They didn't know if they could trust him quite yet because they're looking at this guy who called 911, said that there was a struggle, said that there was choking noises. Then they have Amie, who's found outside of the home, and Michael doesn't have house keys. He's very frantic. There were also some drops of blood on his shirt, and again, it just raised a lot of questions for police. So because of this, the following day, police brought Michael down to the police station to answer some questions and really just walk through the entire night with them. So, according to Michael, he claimed that on the night of February 14th, which was again Valentine's Day, Amie had gone out with a group of girlfriends and Michael stayed home and went into his room to go to sleep that night. Again, Michael's bedroom was on the floor below Amie's and Amie's was on the third floor. Now, shortly after Michael fell asleep, he was woken up by what he thought was Amie's cat outside of the room. He claimed that there was almost the sound of a plate dropping or a shatter of some sort. However, again, he just credited it to the cat. He figured that maybe the cat had gotten into something, knocked something over by accident, but he really didn't pay too much mind to it. So he went back to sleep. However, not too long after this, Michael claimed he got woken up a second time, and this time it was from the sound of Amie screaming and what sounded like a struggle or her being thrown around and being choked. Now, immediately, Michael said that he did not know what to necessarily do in this moment. However, he knew he needed to call 911, so he went to go reach for his cell phone. However, for some reason, he couldn't find his phone. His phone was not in the room. So he began screaming from downstairs, hoping that the intruder would stop or whoever was upstairs would come downstairs. However, he then made the decision to run out of the house and go to the neighbor's home to get help. But for some reason, when he tried to leave the house, he claimed that the front gate that was in front of him and Amie's home wasn't opening. So he had to hop the fence, which caused him to actually cut his stomach on the metal rods of the gate. Again, as I said earlier, Michael did have some drops of blood on his t-shirt. So that would be the reasoning as to why. Now, security camera footage does show Michael knocking on the neighbor's door. However, he receives no answer and quickly runs back into the street. And that is when he came across someone and asked to borrow their phone and called 911. Now, at this point, Michael claims he's panicking because he feels like a lot of time has passed since he left the house. And he was worried that he wasn't moving fast enough and that something bad was going to happen to Amie. Now, ultimately, he did call the police, as we do know, and met them at the scene. So that was Michael's recollection of what had happened that night on the night of February 14th and the early morning hours of the 15th. But I want to go back to the crime scene for a second, which is Amie's home. And I want to talk about this because, as I mentioned initially, police did not see any sign of a struggle or any forced entry. There was no break-in that they could see. However, again, when they arrived, it was dark and they stayed throughout the morning. And once the sun came up, they were able to see something in the light that they missed in the dark. And that was that one of the French doors of the home had been broken into and there was glass shattered all over. However, it was only the bottom panel of the French door. So it wasn't the whole door had been broken, it was just the bottom glass panel of the door. When police started investigating this specific break-in, they also saw that there were some drops of blood nearby where the glass had been broken into. Now, at this point, this gave police a little bit of a direction in the investigation because this told them that there now was a forced entry into the home. And this was police's first indication that Michael may be telling the truth here because, again, up until this point, the finger was mainly being pointed at Michael. So while police were talking to Michael about the timeline and the sequence of events that led up to her murder, they also asked Michael if he had any indication as to who would want to do something like this to Amie. And to their surprise, Michael actually said that he did. Police learned that Amie had an ex-boyfriend who she had a restraining order against. However, the restraining order had recently expired, and that ex-boyfriend's name is Gareth Pursehouse. Amie and Gareth began dating in 2009, and at the time, Amie was doing a lot of modeling, and Gareth was working as an event photographer, and the two would run into each other at the events that they mutually attended in LA. Now, friends who knew Gareth said that he was charming, fun, he was overall a silly guy, he had a funny side to him, and he had a bubbly personality, and he was even working towards becoming a stand stand-up comedian. Now, compared to the other men that Amie had typically dated, Gareth was very different than her usual type. She usually went for the bad boy in the band type. However, she was trying to break that habit. Amie and Gareth dated for approximately 2 years, and from the outside looking in, you would never know that Amie and Gareth had relationship problems or that the relationship was toxic because Amie really kept her relationship cards close to her chest when talking to her friends and her family. She really wasn't as vocal or as open about this specific relationship with her family, especially, which was definitely unusual for her because, as I mentioned, Amie and her family had a very, very close relationship, and they had been there for her every step of the way throughout her divorce and getting back into the dating scene. And she typically was very open in talking about her dating life. Again, this was kind of something that she did in her profession as well. She was a family and marriage therapist. She wrote a book about the new sex Bible for women. She definitely wasn't afraid to talk about these types of things. So for Amie to not be very open with her family was definitely something that was different. And while we don't know for 100% certain about what the reasoning for that is, we can take a guess now and say that it could be because the relationship was extremely, extremely volatile, and Amie really didn't want to let her parents know how toxic things were, almost in order to protect them and not let them worry about her. Now, over the 2 years that Amie and Gareth were together, she had called the police multiple times to report domestic violence. She told police that Gareth had punched her with a closed fist. He had suffocated her multiple times. She also had photo evidence of her injuries. And at the end of her relationship with Gareth, she was able to get a restraining order against him in 2012. Now, Amie was relieved when she got the restraining order and when the relationship with Gareth ended, and she was really just ready to put the relationship in the past and move on with her life. It was around this time that she was working towards all of those degrees that I had mentioned in the beginning that she had gotten. This is when she also became a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so, even though Amie was moving on with her life and looking towards her future, Gareth was not able to put the relationship with Amie in the past. He continuously tried reaching out to Amie time and time again. There were several occasions where Amie's home was actually broken into and personal photos of her were stolen. After one of the break-ins, her computer was actually wiped completely clean and erased. And Amie was 100% confident that Gareth was the one who was behind all of these break-ins and that he was responsible for them. However, she never had any physical proof. At one point in time, Amie actually lost her job as a youth counselor because one of her colleagues was sent a nude photo of her from an anonymous number. And while Amie couldn't prove it, she was certain that Gareth was the one who was behind this. Now, despite the adversity and the obstacles that Amie was being thrown with Gareth, she continued to bounce back each and every time. Her reputation as a doctor was pristine. All of her clients absolutely loved her. They felt like Amie was someone that they could really confide in. She really was a safe haven for the people who came and saw her, and she was very relatable to them. So her professional life, again, was really excelling. And around this time, Amie decided that she was going to put herself back into the dating scene, and she began dating a man named Drew Carey. Now, Drew Carey is a comedian, and he's actually the host of The Price is Right on CBS. Amie and Drew met at a party in LA and immediately hit things off. Drew said instantly that when he met Amie, he knew that she was the one, and he acted on those feelings because shortly after dating, Drew took Amie to Paris for New Year's Eve and proposed, and Amie said yes. Initially, Amie was thrilled. She was equally as head over heels for Drew. However, what she didn't anticipate in the relationship was that because of Drew's public status, it definitely attracted public attention to Amie as well. This was something that she was not used to, and it was also something that she did not want because Amie was truthfully afraid for her safety. She didn't want the public to know where she was or what she was doing, and the main reason for that was because she was afraid that Gareth was watching. So, because of this, and sadly, Drew and Amie ended up breaking off their engagement and the relationship later that year. And even though Amie was the one who initiated this breakup, she really was devastated when the two of them ended the relationship. And she was very upset because she did see a future with Drew. However, her safety was her main concern. Now, throughout police's investigation, when looking into the relationship between Gareth and Amie, they were able to confirm that Gareth's obsession over Amie really was growing throughout the entire time that she was in her relationship with Drew and was at a boiling point by the time that her relationship with Drew ended. He was furious that he was not the one in a relationship with her, and that thought in and of itself caused him to absolutely spiral. So now I want to take us to about a month and a half prior to the murder in January of 2020. Now, on this particular night, Amie was attending an awards show, and Gareth, coincidentally enough, was photographing the red carpet that Amie was about to walk. Now, Amie and Gareth, up until this point, had not seen each other in person, or at least Amie hadn't seen Gareth in almost a decade. And at this time, the restraining order that Amie had on Gareth had expired. Now, Amie was definitely on guard when she realized that Gareth was there, and there was a particular witness who was standing with Amie at the time who said that Gareth approached Amie when she was standing in line for the red carpet. The witness claimed that Gareth angrily walked up to Amie and said, "Funny seeing you here." During this conversation, witnesses claimed that Gareth called Amie a bitch and said that she ruined his life. Amie said that throughout the conversation, Gareth was crying and causing a huge scene. Amie claimed that she tried to walk away from the conversation multiple times. However, Gareth continued following her around the space. And when recalling the conversation with Amie's mom, Penny, when she was telling Penny about the conversation, Amie told her mom that she went into what she called therapist mode and really just tried to do whatever she could to calm Gareth down in that particular setting. However, she ended up leaving the event later that night frightened and scared. It was at this point that Amie realized that she needed to make new efforts to protect herself. Her family talked about hiring private security. However, Amie decided that she was going to get pepper spray and start sharing her location with her friends on her phone. She didn't want to have to get to the point of hiring 24/7 security. Amie had also told Michael, her roommate, that she was worried about the particular French doors, the same door that was broken into on the night of her murder. She was worried that a break-in could end up happening, and she wanted to get those doors bolted up. So she had a handyman come by and talk about securing the doors. However, it wasn't ever done in time. Several friends of Amie also claimed that Amie had told them that if anything were to ever happen to her, that Gareth was the one who was responsible. So it's very clear at this time that Amie was in fear for her life, she was fearing for her safety, and she was worried about what Gareth could possibly try and do. Now, the following day, after that confrontation between Gareth and Amie, Gareth had repeatedly texted Amie after finding her phone number online. He called her and left her a voicemail where he said, quote, "I have so much to say. Please give me a chance to just say it. Please," end quote. And after receiving that voicemail, Amie went ahead and blocked his number yet again. Now, police believe that at this time is when Gareth began preparing his plan to murder Amie on Valentine's Day. Now, the date here, the date that Amie was murdered, also does hold significance. Killing Amie on Valentine's Day was not a random date that Gareth stumbled upon. He was almost sending a message by killing her on Valentine's Day. It's a day that's dedicated to love, to romance, to relationships. And by murdering Amie on a day that's dedicated to love, it almost sends a message that Gareth is proving the point that if he can't have Amie, no one else will. Now, at this point in their investigation, police were very confident that Gareth was responsible for Amie's murder, so much so that only after 15 hours after her death, police were able to go ahead and arrest Gareth Pursehouse. When police arrested Gareth, he initially was very confused, saying he didn't know what this was about. He had been at home all day and night. However, the marks on his body said different. Police noticed right away that Gareth had what appeared to be a fresh black eye and a bite mark on his arm. So now Gareth is arrested, and this case is going to trial. Gareth is being charged with first-degree murder, and he pled not guilty. Now, when putting together the timeline of what happened that night on February 14th, the prosecution was able to get a hold of some video surveillance footage from Amie's next-door neighbor's Ring camera. Now, upon doing so, prosecution saw that at approximately 9 p.m. on February 14th, while Amie was still out with her friends, Gareth is actually seen on this Ring camera wearing a pair of gloves and hopping the fence to get into Amie's yard. It is then that prosecution believes that Gareth broke through those French doors, which is actually consistent with Michael's recollection that night. Remember how I had said earlier that Michael heard what he believed to be Amie's cat pushing over a dish or a plate, something that shattered? So that timeline does match up. I also mentioned that there were drops of blood that were found near the break-in in the home. And after DNA analysis had run a test on the blood, it was confirmed that the blood that was found in the home did in fact belong to Gareth. So this was the confirmation of physical evidence that the prosecution needed. Now, one more unsettling and really just downright creepy facts of this case is that Amie didn't come home that night until approximately 1 a.m. on the 15th of February, and Gareth broke into the home at approximately 9 p.m. So he was waiting at the home for 4 hours for Amie. And because Amie's bed was unmade when police arrived to the scene and everything else in her room was intact, and her friends as well as Michael were able to confirm that Amie did typically always make her bed was always made. However, when police arrived, it was not. It led police to believe that Gareth was waiting in Amie's bed underneath the blankets for 4 hours until she returned home that night. Prosecution believes that once Amie came back and walked into her bedroom, that is when she was surprised and horrified to see Gareth in her bed. It's believed that she threw her phone at Gareth because her phone was actually found on the bed, and then turned around and tried running out of her room before Gareth grabbed her, and the two began wrestling while Amie was fighting for her life. And that is when it's believed that Gareth received the black eye and the bite mark on his arm. During this struggle is when it's believed that Michael was screaming for Amie upstairs, and police believe that Gareth did not know that anyone was home at the time when he heard the scream. They believed it actually startled him and caused him to drop the syringe that was found on the balcony. Now, the syringe that was found on the balcony, like I said, it was a darker yellow-brown liquid in the syringe, and police were able to figure out what was in that syringe, and they were able to confirm that the syringe was filled with liquid nicotine. And police say that if that was injected into anyone, it would kill them instantly. However, it is possible that it would go undetected, which police and prosecution believe was Gareth's plan all along. He wanted to inject Amie with something that was untraceable and wouldn't go detected. However, it's believed that Gareth's plans were interrupted when Michael began screaming because Gareth didn't know that anyone was home at the time. So it's believed that Gareth went in with one plan, however, panicked in the moment when he realized that there was someone else in the house, and that is when he picked up Amie's body and dropped her from the third-story balcony of her room into the backyard. Gareth is then seen again on the neighbor's Ring camera, hopping the fence to leave Amie's house and then running away. Now, the prosecution also brought up a phone call that Gareth had with a friend of his shortly after his arrest from jail. During the call, he says, quote, "I guess I'm officially a bad boy now, right? I've always been kinda. So yeah, shit's not great. I'm not getting out of here. End quote. To the prosecution, they really conveyed this specific phone call as almost Gareth acknowledging that he did play a part in this and that he was responsible for Amie's murder in its entirety. Him saying, I'm not getting out of here. Shit's not great. I've always been a bad boy. It's just more so feeding into the fact that he is aware that he is responsible for this. Now, there was also something very telling and a very damning piece of evidence in Amie's trial that's very unusual in murder trials. It's even been coined as Amie testifying in her own trial because of this. Hours after the red carpet incident, when Amie and Gareth had that confrontation, Amie went home and wrote an email to herself. Again, this email was to herself. And what she is referring to in this email is about Gareth and the incident that she experienced earlier that night. In the email, she said, quote, "He couldn't stop obsessing over me. He recited text messages that I had sent about 9 years ago, recited the date, who they were to, and exactly what they said, word for word. I couldn't believe it. I was very scared. I'm pretty nervous that I'm more on his radar now, that he's focused on harming me. I'm hoping that this interaction and me listening and giving him time may have caused a neutralization in his anger towards me. It terrifies me that he's been obsessed with me for 9 years and thinks about me every day." End quote. Now, again, this is something that's very unusual in murder cases in general. Very rarely do you have the victim saying any sort of statement such as this. Now, when the defense was making their argument in the trial, they claimed that when Gareth saw Amie at that award show in 2020, Gareth was sent into a deep, debilitating depression. That is word for word what they said. They claimed that the only solution for this was for Gareth to speak to Amie on Valentine's Day in 2020. They said that speaking to Amie was his only intention that night. And in regards to Amie's murder, they claim that they believe Amie actually fell on her own accord that night over her balcony. They claim that the liquid nicotine syringe was actually intended for Gareth himself because Gareth had intended to end his life that night. So they were trying to suggest that Amie was the one who attacked Gareth, leading Gareth to have to take matters into his own hands and defend himself, and not actually go through with ending his own life with this liquid nicotine syringe. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, that doesn't make sense, you're not the only one, because no one was believing this whatsoever. And when looking at Gareth's sequence of events, Gareth went through what he believed to be the necessary steps to not get caught for being responsible for Amie's murder. He was wearing gloves. He was covering the neighbors' cameras when he was walking by them. He was running away from the crime scene. He brought what he believed to be an undetectable substance. This did not seem like someone who cared if he got caught because they were planning on ending their life later that night. Now, interestingly enough, in the defense's closing statements, they didn't deny the fact that Gareth broke into Amie's home. They didn't even deny the fact that he killed her. They actually said that if Gareth had not been there that night, Amie would still be alive. However, again, they claimed that it was self-defense. Now, when it came down to the deliberation, the jury ended up deliberating for 2 days before coming back with their verdict, and that is when they found Gareth Pursehouse to be guilty of first-degree murder with a special circumstance of lying in wait, and Gareth was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During Gareth's sentencing, he did not speak, he did not make a statement, and he will be in jail for the rest of his life. Now, while Amie's family and friends are very grateful that there was justice in this case, everyone agrees that this should have never happened. Amie should undoubtedly 100% still be here. And again, like I said in the very beginning, it really is a tragedy that she isn't. But with that being said, you guys, that is going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah, and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday, and you're not going to want to miss it. I'll be back next week with a brand new one for you guys, and until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.